no helicopters have been procured for me to go to golf course. Thank you.
I've never said he wasn't a great politician. I'm just saying he's a officer.
It's supposed to be an interview.
How'd you play out there today?
Well, I found the conditions challenging, mostly because there's no grass on the golf course, but there never has been.
I'm thinking about the swag bag, and I have high hopes for the swag bag.
When you got 3 crevices on the green, your course is trash.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Beltway Golfer Podcast, episode 47. Alex Dixon here. This weekend in Washington, D.C. is the Dr. Charlie Sifford Sr. Invitational to commemorate Charlie Sifford's 100th birthday. Joining the Beltway Golfer Podcast this week is one of his sons, Charlie Sifford Jr., who is going to be in town for the events. Charlie Sifford is one of many prominent African-American golfers from the mid-century that helped break golf's color barrier. Charlie Sifford himself is often referred to as the Jackie Robinson of golf because he was the first African-American golfer to actually get his PGA Tour card once the PGA of America's Caucasian-only clause finally came down in 1961. Thursday, June 2nd, would have been his 100th birthday. And so this year, for the centennial celebration of Charlie Sifford's birth, there's events happening throughout the year, including at the Memorial Tournament in Ohio this weekend. I know they're doing some kind of commemoration. But this weekend in Washington, D.C., there's going to be a 3-day event that was put together by Golf My Future My Game and Craig Kirby, former guest on this podcast. And it includes a reception where the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, will announce that June 2nd is Charlie Sifford Day in Washington, D.C. Friday, I believe they're donating some artifacts and memorabilia from Charlie Sifford's collection to the African American Museum, History Museum, the Smithsonian. And Saturday, the 3-day event culminates with a Ryder Cup style junior tournament that includes junior golfers from the first tee of Greater Washington, D.C., from the Golf My Future My Game program, as well as some junior golfers from around the country from some other similar programs, I believe, in California and maybe even Detroit as well. I have to double check. Go to golfmyfuturemygame.org and you can see more of the timeline of events. Saturday's tournament, the junior tournament, is free and open to the public. But Golf My Future My Game, this is the kind of thing they're doing. So it's a great organization to donate to if you're so inclined. But the conversation with Charlie Sifford Jr. was great. We talked over Zoom. Really looking forward to getting a chance to meet him at one of the events this weekend. Charlie Sifford Jr. was a pioneer and he deserves more recognition than I think he's gotten over the years. And he's starting to get that, I suppose, better late than never now that this is the centennial of his birth. Another event happening later on this year to celebrate Charlie Sifford's achievements is around the President's Cup, which is happening at Quail Hollow in Charlotte, which is where Charlie Sifford was born and raised, but prior to moving to Philadelphia and becoming a regular at Cobb's Creek. The President's Cup is putting together also another Charlie Sifford Cup, but it's going to be the top HBCU golf programs competing in a tournament, I believe, the day before the President's Cup begins. And if you look at the rankings right now, Howard University's golf program is the top ranked boys program in the country for HBCUs. So I would imagine there's a good chance they'll be participating in that. But that's essentially it. I'm looking forward to the events this weekend. I had a great conversation with Charlie Sifford Jr. It was an honor and pleasure to speak with him. Hope you enjoy it. Here it is, episode 47 of the Beltway Golfer Podcast. Enjoy. Before we get to the conversation with Charlie Sifford Jr., a couple words about two sponsors of the Beltway Golfer Podcast. First is Fore Craft Cocktails, F-O-R-E, craftcocktails.com. They've got a pre-mixed transfusion in a can, perfect for on and off the course. Premium vodka, ginger ale, grape juice, lime juice, already in the can, ready to go. It's not a mixer. It's already got the booze in it. No reason to add vodka unless, you're certainly entitled to. But it's a refreshing drink. I enjoyed several over Memorial Day weekend. My beer fridge and drink fridge here in my podcast studio / garage is stocked with some Fore Craft. Go to forecraftcocktails.com. They've got a location finder right there on the website. Total Wine and Beverage all over Northern Virginia carries them. A lot of green grass facilities, both private and public, are starting to carry them as well. So seek it out if you haven't tried it. Forecraftcocktails.com. Also sponsoring the Beltway Golfer podcast this week is a golf course many folks listening to this probably think they know very well. Reston National Golf Course. Reston National, if you don't know, is under new ownership and new management within the last couple years. And if you haven't been out there recently, they've been putting a lot of work and resources into updating the grounds there. The clubhouse has been totally renovated. Doesn't even look the same. They're getting ready to open up a new bar and restaurant. It's really night and day from what it looked like before. The pro shop looks totally different. They just added a whole bunch of flat screens and upgraded the patio. If you're walking up to the clubhouse to the left, it looks fantastic. And recently they've started to put a lot of work into the course. They've updated the driving range, all the bunkering, getting it, in as good as shape as that can possibly be. So if you were like myself and hadn't been out to Reston Nashville in the last couple of years, go back out, check it out. It's in great shape. They're putting a lot of effort and resources into it. It hasn't moved. It's still incredibly convenient. One of the most convenient 18-hole public golf courses in Washington D.C. right there off the toll road. Go check it out again. Reston National Golf Course. First off, Mr. Sifford, thank you very much for joining the Beltway Golfer podcast. It's an honor to speak to you and to talk about yourself and your father and his legacy and the event that's coming up the weekend of what would be his 100th birthday at Langston Golf Course here in Washington, D.C. So let's start with that event. So first off, I understand you are coming to town for the event?
Yes, I'll be in there Wednesday evening on the 1st, and then there's a little party for my father on the 2nd, and then we're gonna go over to the Smithsonian Institute where they're gonna enshrine some of his memorabilia into it on Friday, and then there's a junior tournament being played at Langston that Saturday. So we got a full weekend schedule.
So Thursday, June 2nd, that would be his 100th.
That's his actual birthday, yes.
So he was born on June 2nd, 1922.
Correct.
Wow. Now, have you said, and when you say the Smithsonian, this is the African American Museum of History and Culture.
Yes.
Does he? They don't have any pieces from your father in there yet?
No.
Oh, no. Okay.
Not that I know of.
I
haven't been there as far as I know that they don't have anything there.
I've been once. I feel like they had some Tiger Woods stuff, but I could be wrong. I think that.
Well, I think everybody has Tiger Woods stuff, but they can get it.
Right. So that's gonna be a whole weekend, like 3 days. And so then the junior
right.
tournament, which is, as I understand, it's gonna have some juniors from like the first tee up against some juniors from the Golf My Future My Game and some others.
Correct. Yes.
And it'll be a fun day.
Yeah, it's gonna be like, I guess, like a little match play for for bragging rights and trophy rights at the end of the day.
Very cool. Now, where do you reside yourself?
I live in Cleveland, Ohio.
In Cleveland.
My family moved here in '75, and my father took over Sleepy Hollow in Brecksville, Ohio. And that was a few years before the senior tour got started.
Okay.
And then after the senior tour started, that's where he ended up start playing regularly on that tour.
Okay. You don't have to answer this if you don't want, but just so we can do some math to figure out your perspective in some of the events of your father's life. How old was he when he had you? Or how old are you?
He was 25. He was 25 when I was born.
Okay, so you lived 3/4 of a century.
Right.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's dive into it. I mean, Charlie Sifford is a well-known name in golf, obviously, but I think to a younger generation, to a lot of people, is not well known enough. So let's start with kind of going through his career and why he's such an important figure in the history of not just African American golf, but golf in general. I have not read his autobiography, which once we set this up, I put it in Amazon. Amazon's shipping me the book as we speak, but I haven't got a chance to read it yet.
Okay.
But I have read a lot about, just the integration in the sport and that era, and did some research, additional research since we started talking. But let's start back. Let's kind of walk through your dad's life a little bit. I mean, at the high level, some folks compare him to Jackie Robinson, right? I mean, he's kind of known as the Jackie Robinson of golf simply because he was the first on the PGA.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was a good friend of Jackie's. And before he decided to take on the PGA and try to play on the tour, he had a long conversation with Jackie to try to decide if he was going to do that or not. And Jackie told him, if you asked him, was he a quitter? And my father said, no. Once I set my mind to doing something, I'm going to do my best to succeed at it. And Jackie said he was glad to hear that, because he told my father, said, you're going to run into a lot of obstacles, and quitting is going to be passing through your mind at some point. But as long as you determine and have the talent, you should be able to succeed at what you really want to do. You're going to face it. He told him he was going to face a lot of adversity, which he did. He faced it, dealt with it, and just kept on pushing.
So to frame a little bit as we go through your father's life and career, how long this took. I read in one of the articles I was reading, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that conversation that you're referring to was, I read somewhere like 1947, like late 40s.
It's in his 40s, not too long after Jackie had broken through.
Okay, but that means your dad is in his mid 20s.
Correct.
He didn't get the Caucasian-only clause, and your dad getting his approved PGA Tour card didn't come until 1960, so 13 years later.
Right. Well, actually, 61.
61. Okay.
61 is when they filed a lawsuit, and it was the Caucasian clause was stricken, and he actually got his players approved card in 62. He was like, that's when he actually was approved player to play on the tour.
So as we go through this, I mean, he's 40 years old.
Yes, right.
Wow.
So he compared to the now, he's like 20 years behind the time as far as what the players are now. They coming out of school 19, 20, 21 years old, ready to play, and he couldn't participate, in what they call the prime of his career.
Right. So to back up a little bit, just some early days. So your father was born and raised in North Carolina, in the Charlotte area, correct?
Charlotte, correct.
Okay. But then at some point as a teenager, he moved up to Philadelphia?
Yes, he used to work at the country club of Charlotte. He was a caddy there. And it was probably within a 3 or 4 year period between the caddy, and he became one of the better players at the country club. But he wasn't allowed to play in too many golf courses in the Charlotte area. So he had an older brother that lived in Philadelphia, and he moved to Philadelphia so he had have a chance opportunity to play a little bit more up there. He went to work at, I think it was Nabisco Company, okay, in order to make ends meet until he got situated enough where he had some money where he can go to the golf course. And the first golf course he was played in Philadelphia was called Cobb's Creek, and that's where he honed his game at while he was living in Philly.
So that was essentially his home course while he was there.
Yes, right.
Cobb's Creek is well known, and it's in the news recently because I think it's closed right now.
They're doing a lot of
renovations and right. But there were some good golfers there at the time. Did I read also Howard Wheeler?
Howard Wheeler. He was at that time. He was the man. If you can compete against him, you knew you had a strong game. I think my father told me the first time he played Howard had beat him up pretty bad on the golf course, and that just made him more determined to improve his game, so he can compete against Howard. And they got to the point where whoever had the hot putter will end up winning. But his game got strong enough where he can compete head to head with Howard many occasions, and then eventually they became partners when they play a lot of match plays against other players. And
as background, Mr. Wheeler was another, prominent African-American golfer.
Yes, right.
And did I read this so they both competed on the UGA tour.
Correct.
And one thing they had in common was both Howard Wheeler and your father both won the National Open, the national championship on the UGA, 6 times each.
Correct.
Which is
my father won it 5 times in a row and 6 out of 7.
And
then the last time he won it, they just gave him the whole trophy, and it's on display.
Is that right?
At the Hall of Fame, yes.
Oh, that's very cool. And so, in looking this up, I was doing a little research. That stretch that your father won the UGA National Championship from 1952 to 1956, I believe the year after was this is bringing it back to my Washington D.C. connection, was actually here at East Potomac Park Golf Course that I had to look up an old article, but it sounded like your father had the lead until the final round, and then Teddy Rhodes came back and beat him.
Right. Yeah. Him and Teddy was also an excellent player. He was from Nashville, Tennessee. Him and my father were real close. Our families were close. You know, I called him Uncle Teddy.
Okay.
And so, you know, they traveled a lot together, and he was instrumental in getting Billy Eckstein to sponsor my father while they were playing on the tour. Because Teddy at the time was teaching Joe Lewis the game of golf.
Got it. So, you know, so your father's winning UGA, you know, throughout the early to mid 50s. You know, the Caucasians-only clause in the PGA Tour isn't lifted until 1961. Can you talk about that period in the late 50s of your father trying to break through on the PGA Tour and kind of the resistance he was seeing?
Yes. There were several courses that, you know, on the tour that when he played on the West Coast, they can play the Los Angeles Open, you know, they could play in San Diego, and I think there was a tournament in Phoenix that they could play in because they were opens. So that means anyone can play in them. But once the tour left California and San Diego and started going down south, you know, in Georgia, Mississippi, states like that, he wasn't allowed to play in the tournaments down there. But the PGA did have a tournament that they sanctioned, but it wasn't an official tournament because it was 54 holes. It was a Long Beach Open in 1957, and he won that. It was just a 54-hole tournament, so it wasn't considered, you know, a regulation PGA tournament, even though they co-sponsored it.
I would imagine he was, you know, trying to get on the PGA Tour. Is there like an application process that kept getting denied, or was it just that clause was there?
They had you fill out your entry fee and fill out the application, send your entry fee in, and then it was up to the sponsors to determine if they were going to let you play in the tournament. At that time, the PGA really didn't have as much control over tournaments that they do now. Okay. It was the sponsors and the golf course that determined who was going to play in the tournaments, and they just didn't want any people of color to play in the tournament at the time. Even after the Caucasian clause was struck down, a lot of tournaments changed their title from open to invitationals. That way they still can have control over who can play in the tournament.
Oh, interesting. I was reading that even some of those tournaments that you mentioned that he was allowed in San Diego and LA and Phoenix, you know, just because he was maybe allowed to play in the tournament doesn't mean he was allowed in clubhouses, right, local hotels, restaurants. Right,
true. Most of the time during his traveling, he stayed with friends that he had met, you know, in the different cities. That's where he stayed at, ate dinner at. They wouldn't let him eat in the locker room. There were few that let him. He could eat his food. He can get his food, but he had to go into the locker room. He couldn't eat in the restaurant. He had to change his, in some tournaments, he couldn't even go into the locker room. He had to change his shoes in the parking lot.
Wow.
So it was rough, but you know, he was determined. And some of the other players, as time went along, you know, saw what he was going through, and they start joining him in the locker room to eat or in the parking lot. You know, just to show that they were supporting him for what he was trying to do.
And your father, you know, he eventually became the first one to actually join the PGA Tour, and really through a large part of that era was kind of the face of the movement. But there were several other African American golfers that were trying to play in these tournaments and trying to break through.
Yeah, they had a lot of few. It was the Ray Botts. You had Cliff Brown, George Johnson. They had Bill Spiller out of Los Angeles.
That was the name I was trying to pull. Yeah. Bill Spiller.
And my cousin Curtis Sifford also played. You know, it was at any given, and it was anywhere from 10 to 12 African Americans that had the talent to play, that they just weren't allowed the opportunity to play the game. So, you know, most of them were, you know, they did, and then after a certain amount of being turned away, a lot of them just lost interest in trying to get on the tour. And they just more or less just concentrated on playing on what they call back then the Chitlin Tour. Had the tournaments going through the South where the African Americans could play on public golf courses.
Was the quote unquote Chitlin Tour, was that the UGA Tour, or is that something different?
No, that was different. That was, you know, yeah, the UGA was organized after the Chitlin Tour was established.
Okay.
But then that kind of phased out, and then the UGA came in, and that was the main tour that the players played on then, from the late 50s, early 60s.
Because so I mean, just doing the math. So you know, we're getting into the mid to late 50s. So your father's, you know, getting into his mid to late 30s, and he was 25 when he had you. I mean, did you ever go to any of these tournaments? Do you like what's your earliest memory of going to these tournaments?
The ones I went to was just, you know, around on the West Coast. You know, I went to the LA Open, San Diego's tournaments that he could drive to, because, you know, he just didn't have the money, you know, to travel around the country.
Oh. Were you living in Southern California?
Yeah.
Is that
we lived in California? Yeah, we lived in California. And we moved there in '57. Okay. So I was 9. I turned 10 in California, and we just didn't have the money to travel across country, you know, with the whole family. So he traveled mostly by himself, you know, going across the different states and countries. And but the only time I really saw him play was basically at the LA Open, you know, when we were living out there. I didn't really see him play a lot or caddy for him until he got on the senior tour, you know, much later, you know, like in the early 80s when the senior tour started taking off.
Another thing I read, I mean, everyone's trying to get on the PGA Tour for a number of reasons, but that's where the money is.
Right.
And so the UGA didn't generate quite as, you know, the money that the PGA Tour did. And so a lot of, like your father and a lot of others, to make ends meet, would have to go to public courses and hustle for the cash.
It was a lot of money exchange on them golf courses. You know, they had some big money games. Yeah. A lot of gambling going on. You know, the thing about it, they were all friends, but when it came to golf, they would try to beat each other.
Sure.
You know, but they traveled together. They stayed in the same hotels. You know, it was like you know, they just enjoyed each other's company until they got on the golf course, and it was, you know, the friendship was over until the ground was over.
Yeah. I read that, you know, as the lead up to getting the Caucasian-only clause removed, which was in place, I believe, from 1931 until 1961, when your father had a hand in removing it, but was that he had applied to play at Pebble Beach in the Bing Crosby Pro-Am and kept getting denied. And maybe Joe Lewis and Jackie Robinson and the AG of California all kind of stepped in.
Joe Lewis had a lot of influence, you know, at the time. You know, he was the heavyweight champion in the world, and everybody knew that he was a good golfer. He got a few players into the San Diego Open. Okay. And then they played well down there, and a couple of them qualified, you know, to go to the next tournament, which I think was Pebble Beach, you know, after that. But that's how they were able to get in by finishing. I think if you finish in the top 10 of the previous tournament, that automatically qualified you for the next tournament. And that's how they qualified and played in some of the other tournaments.
Were your father and Joe Lewis, were they close?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, they were real close. I remember walking around, you know, in California, we were living out there. Him and Teddy and Joe and Billy, they would be on the golf course all the time playing golf.
Interesting. You know, it seems to me, I mean, obviously that's, you know, nowadays imagining the Caucasians-only clause that lasts for 30 years is kind of mind-blowing. But also you read some of these anecdotes. One I read was how Spiller and Joe Lewis both tried to get into the San Diego Open, and they denied both, and essentially only because Joe Lewis made a big stink about it and went public in the press, that they eventually allowed Joe in, but not Spiller, almost as a PR move.
Right. It was more of publicity, you know, because, you know, Joe, who he was the champion. So, you know, he spoke out. So they had, you know, they kind of bent their rules a little bit to let him in there, but they wouldn't let anybody else in. And then I think eventually he got some of the other players into the tournament, you know, in the next couple of years. But that first year, he was the only one allowed to play.
Got it. I mean, what about yourself? I mean, do you remember that era leading up to him getting his PGA Tour card? And, what was that like? I mean, was that a tough time and frustration? And
well, it was frustrating because I didn't know any the aspects of the lawsuit, but I know it was a tough time for him because basically when he told me, he was frustrated because he couldn't play in a lot of tournaments, and he told me that the Attorney General Moss he had met several years before, filing a lawsuit in '61 that he was playing golf, and when the Los Angeles Open was supposed to be getting ready to play in California, and Moss asked him, was he playing? And he said no. And he told Moss why he couldn't play. And that's when, because of the Caucasian-only clause, and Moss was the one that initiated the lawsuit. And he told the PGA that they couldn't have another tournament in California as long as they had that Caucasian-only clause in there.
And so they basically, based on that letter that A.G. Moss wrote, they removed the Caucasians only clause. Why did I read that? But that your father didn't get his PGA Tour card necessarily officially for another few years.
Yeah, well, they have what they call a player's approved card. You have to be able to do certain things during that time. And the player's approved card, I just approved you to play on the tour.
Okay.
You had to win X number of dollars, make a certain amount of cuts and things like that, and be recommended by a couple members that's already PGA members in order to become a full PGA player. And Jerry Barber, that was at the time, was a former PGA champion. He was running, I think, the Griffith Park Golf Courses for the city of Los Angeles. And he was one of the players that, wrote that a recommendation so he could get his full PGA card.
So he finally gets the Caucasians only clause is removed. Your father's 39. Right. He doesn't get his PGA Tour card until 64. So he's 42. But this is what I thought. So your father won officially twice on tour, right?
Right.
The 67 Greater Hartford Open, which is now the Travelers Championship. Right. And the 69 LA Open, which is now the Genesis at Riviera. Right. But he's, if my math is right, he's like 44, 46 years old.
I think he was 45 when he won Hartford, and then 47 when he won the LA Open.
So if nothing else, I mean, that goes to show, that the prime of his career, if he was able to play on the biggest tour in golf on earth for those 20 years from the time he was, his early 20s to 40, how many times could have he won?
Yeah, there's no telling what he could have done. He might not have done anything, but we never know now. But there was always that he never had the opportunity to see what he could do and to prove what he could do. But at 45, that just shows the determination that he had to be able to compete, at that age against the younger guys that was out there. I'm pretty sure it wasn't too many guys in their 40s, still playing golf, at that high level.
Yeah. As your dad got kind of older and after he retired and through the rest of his life, did he, how did he? I'm just putting myself in, I can't. It's impossible for me to put him, be in his shoes, but I can't imagine how frustrated you'd be, and thinking about that.
Yeah, he had some frustrating times, but as he got older, he mellowed out, and realized that, after his career was over, he did real well on the senior tour. He made a lot of money, that he was comfortable. He realized he succeeded at what he wanted to do, prove that a black man could play the game at the highest level. And that's what he really wanted to do. He just wanted to show that if he given a chance, he could play and be competitive against, anybody in the world. And he was happy, bottom line, he was happy with his career at the end. It was, there was no more stress on him, in his later years. He just relaxed. He played a lot of friendly golf with friends and family, and, and just enjoyed his later years in life.
Did he smoke cigars until the end?
He smoked cigars up until probably his mid 80s.
Wow. And
then after that, he carried, he chewed them more than he smoked them after that. But he always, he always had one. It was always a cigar around. he might take a couple puffs and put it down, you know, pick it up again, relight it. But
do you know when that started? That was essentially his trademark, or one
yeah,
of them.
he started smoking cigars when he was caddying, when he was like 13 years old.
Oh, wow.
And he smoked all the way up until, you know, late 80s. And you know, it was a
don't let the Surgeon General hear that. I mean, smoking cigars for 70 years until 92.
He was this, you know, he never had any problems because of the cigar. You know, but the cigar is a little bit different than smoking a cigarette.
Sure.
But he enjoyed it. It relaxed him. That was, you know, when he got nervous or whatever playing golf, that was helping him calm his nerves down. You know, sure. When he was playing.
Interesting. What about some of the other? You know, there's, you know, your dad is the first African American on the PGA Tour. Is you know, noted as being, you know, Jackie Robinson of golf. But there were, as we mentioned, a couple already. But there are several other, you know, trailblazers in the sport, African Americans. I'm just curious, you know, did he have a close relationship? I think I'd read in one piece about, you know, maybe early on with Lee Elder, there was some conflict there about credit he was getting when he got into the Masters. But I'm curious, like, what was his relationship with Lee Elder, Calvin Peete, Jim Thorpe, like all those guys?
Oh, they all got along. You know, Pete Brown, who won in 1964, he won the San Diego tournament. They were real close. Calvin Peete, Lee Elder, you know, there was nothing, no animosity between the players, but they knew the rules was dictating what happened. Nothing sure. between them dictated what happened. You know, because there was several times, because they were early in my dad's career. They said if you won a tournament, you automatically qualified for the Masters. So he won in '67, he didn't get no invitation, and he won in '69, he never got an invitation. So, you know, he was bitter about that because, you know, he felt that he had qualified. He did what he had to do, win a tournament, and yet, you know, they wouldn't let him play. But then when he got inducted to the Hall of Fame, that I think that more than made up for not being invited to the Masters, because he never dreamed that he would be elected into the Hall of Fame, and that was just something that he was really, really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that piece there is interesting because it's more than understandable. You know, Lee Elder is celebrated and rightfully so as you know, the first black man to play in the Masters. Right. However, if you just read that, you might think that he was the first one that essentially qualified to play, where that is not the case. You know,
but you know, they like to say there were rule changes along the way that stopped Pete and as well as my father from playing in the Masters.
Yeah, interesting.
But they understood, you know, like I said, there was no animosity between any of the players out there because they know the decision was out of their hands as far as who was going to play where.
Yeah. Your father developed, obviously later in life, developed a relationship with Tiger. Yes. I understand Charlie Woods is named after your father?
Yes. And I had the opportunity to meet Charlie when Tiger got inducted to the Hall of Fame. My grandson met him, Tiger and Charlie, you know, and they took pictures with each other. They seemed to hit it off, you know, two young kids, you know, they had a ball talking to each other.
What would your dad think of Charlie's game at such a young age?
He'd say the same thing that he told me when we first saw Tiger. The first time he saw Tiger was like he was 14 years old, and he knew then that he was going to be something special. And I think he would say the same thing about Charlie, because I've seen Charlie swing, and the swing is amazing.
Yeah,
you know, you wouldn't think he's as young as he is with that kind of swing.
At some point, Tiger said, you know, your dad was the grandfather he never had. So, I mean, they must have gotten close.
Yeah, they called him. He called him his honorary grandfather. You know, whenever they saw each other, you know, they would huddle up and hug and talk. You know, and just had a nice conversation. One year we was down at Firestone was played here in Akron. We were at the tournament, and Tiger was on a practice round with his coach. Butch Harmon was out there. You know, most of the players kind of tune out when somebody's calling their name while they're out there practicing. But my father called him, and he stopped in his tracks and turned around and just waved at my father and told him to come on out on the hole with me and walk up. They walked up to the green together, and I could see everybody was around in that area was wondering who they had no idea who my father was, and everybody was thinking, who was that? Who was that? But, because it's at that in the 80s, and I mean like in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of people who had no idea who Charlie Sifford was.
Yeah, I think that's probably still.
Then he got a little recognition when he got inducted to the Hall of Fame. Then that's when people started recognizing the name again, because he had been away from the limelight once he retired from the senior tour.
Do you think today, 2022, do you think the PGA Tour and just the world of golf in general has done a good job with your father's legacy and some of the other black golfers of his time?
They're starting to give some recognition, to the African Americans and the rest of the non-white players out there. They're starting to recognize them more, what they did, what they had to go through, and there's been a lot of things scheduled this year to celebrate my father's 100th birthday. The Genesis, on the first hole, they had a flag with a picture of my father highlighted with 100 written on the flag, and they had a big sign billboard on the first hole. The players had it. They also did the same thing with the flag, just to just let everybody, so people could be aware that it was my father's 100th birthday. So they starting to, they supporting the first tee, which is, to help minorities as well as whites to, get the kids involved in the game, and they starting to contribute money to certain aspects that help create the game and make it grow. It's probably something that, a lot of people think they should have done earlier, but they're doing it now. So, everything's, it's a slow process, no matter what it is. But, I think they're moving in the right direction right now. And, it's a positive thing.
What about specifically Augusta National and the Masters? I mean, they're arguably the most revered organization in American golf. And they only just recently, in a few years, finally invited Lee Elder out to be a part of that ceremonial first tee. Have they ever reached out to your father or your family to say, hey, we made a mistake?
No, my father none of the Siffords have ever heard anything from the organizers of the Masters. We never heard anything from them at all.
So it seems like
not even when he got inducted, got the Presidential Medal of Freedom Award, there was no contact whatsoever from them. So, we had other people to reach out, but not the Augusta people.
That tells me there's work to be done.
Yeah, well, he's true, but everything's, I guess, takes time.
Yeah, especially with them. What's your take, or what do you? Well, let me ask a couple. Let me go back up a little bit. What about yourself? Did you try to follow your father's footsteps? Were you ever a big golfer? Are you a big golfer?
I play golf. I like the game, but I didn't love it like the way my father did. And other to put the time in, the devotion, hard work, you have to love that game.
Yeah.
And I saw what my father was going through. Some of the frustration and disappointment. I just didn't love it the way he did. I played baseball all the way up to my first year in college. Okay. And that was my primary sport. Then I would play golf because other people around me played, but I played it because I like to play the game and be around my friends, but I didn't love it the way he did. I just couldn't see myself out there practicing 4, 5, 6 hours a day and not being treated equally, with other players.
Sure.
I just couldn't see doing that. And I just never developed that love that he had for it. And he never really pushed me. He let me decide to do what I wanted to do as far as sports. And I chose to play baseball. And he was happy, he was happy with that. As long as I was doing something.
What about you have a brother? Do you have a brother and a sister?
I just have a brother. He played football.
He played football.
And he played golf even less than I did. And, coming up through high school and stuff. He was 90% football. He played in junior college, and he hurt his knee, and he didn't play anymore.
Have you felt since you share your father's name, has that kind of brought with it the responsibility of trying to promote his legacy?
No, it's an honor to be able to recognize my father. It's a privilege. I've been pretty busy this year, but it's something I enjoy doing because of the love I have for my father.
Got it. What about nowadays? There aren't a lot of African American golfers on tour today. There's only 3 or 4.
Right.
And there's periods in the late 60s and 70s, when there were more.
Correct.
What's your take on that?
Well, it's the exposure to the game is one thing. When my father was coming up, and the other guys that was playing around the era they were exposed to the game by caddy. That's. But when the golf cart came out, they eliminated a lot of the caddy jobs at the country clubs.
Oh, right.
And then they set the cost of the equipment. Inflation really hit the golf industry. When, back in the day, you can buy a whole set of clubs, bag, irons, woods, and everything for $200 or $300. Now you got clubs that cost $300 or $400 a piece. So
right.
the cost of the game is inhibited.
Yeah.
When it comes to you got to pay for green fees to play golf. Baseball, basketball, football, you just go to the open field and play.
Yeah, sure.
It doesn't cost you anything. So the cost factor as far as equipment and playing the game and the opportunity to be exposed to the game it's not there like it was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Right. Well, this has been great, and it sounds like the event's going to be terrific. That's fantastic. They're coming in town for it. I understand the mayor is going to announce June 2nd as Charlie Sifford Day, and
that's what I heard. Yes,
which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any recollection? I found some old articles. I mentioned the one UGA national championship after he had won 5 in a row that he came in second at East Potomac. But I did find one. They used to have it wasn't a PGA. I don't even think it was a UGA event, but the Capital City Open. I think he won like when he was in his 50s, like later on in the 70s. But do you have any recollection, or have you played any of the courses here in D.C. like Langston, where the tournament?
I played in Langston when I was a teenager. Because UGA when they had their tournaments, they also had a junior division.
Okay.
And I played in that. Renee Powell played in that. And that's how, we met when we were kids, and we're still friends to this day.
Oh, that's excellent.
And that's when, I played in Langston, I played in Pittsburgh, wherever they had the junior tournaments, we was able to play. And I had fun playing it, but I still just didn't have that passion, that you need. I just played to have fun, and enjoy the game.
Did I see Renee Powell? She recently won an award named after your father, right? A Charlie Sifford Award.
This is an award that was developed by the PGA and the Southern Company.
Okay.
Given to someone that was working towards the diversity in the game of golf.
Got it. Okay.
And we thought it was appropriate, because she's had a lot of junior tournaments at her course. She works with the veterans. She gives the ladies and the men lessons, and they have tournaments at her golf course in Clearview in East Canton, Ohio. So we thought it was appropriate that, she would be the first one. She's working towards diversity, plus she's also a close family friend.
Oh, excellent.
But yeah, so it really worked out, So we was at the, and then, like I said, I usually go down and play her golf course once or twice a year. Down in East Canton. It's a real nice golf course.
That's Clearview, correct?
Clearview, yes.
Yeah.
The PGA made it a national monument. Named it,
really?
Made it a national, yeah.
Very cool. Well, listen, I'll let you go. I know I've gone over our time here, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk, and
it was my pleasure.
I hope we get the opportunity to meet when you're in town for the event.
I'll be there like that. I'll be there on the 1st, and we'll be there until the 4th.
Excellent.
Probably leaving out that Sunday, coming back home.
Fantastic. Well, I'll at the very least I'll be out checking out some of the junior tournament.
Okay, yeah, I'll be there because I've been told I have to give out the awards.
Okay.
So I'll be there for the whole. I'll be there for the whole tournament. It'll be a pleasure to see the young kids out there playing.
Yeah.
Playing some competition like that. I didn't have the opportunity to play and organize tournaments like that at that younger age,
Right.
other than the UGA. And that was it. That was the only thing, only organized tournaments I ever played in when I was a kid. So it'll be a pleasure to see the young kids out there playing and see how much talent they have, and see, hopefully we might be able to get a couple of them out there on the tour somewhere down the line.
You never know. Very cool.
You never know.
That's right. All right, Mr. Sifford, this has been great. I appreciate it very much, and
Okay.
we'll see you.
Enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Hopefully, I see you next week.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Thank you,
All
sir.
right. Bye-bye.
I don't have a good golf game, but I don't really care. I'm a regular dude living in D.C., and I want to know about D.C.-centric golf stuff. If you can tell me something that I don't already know, then that is great for me. I don't want the regular stuff. I want exciting stuff. I want different stuff. I want stuff I can't hear elsewhere. But I want it to be about D.C. golf.